William Bill Hargrove woke before dawn, as he did most mornings, and sat quietly on the edge of his bed. The first light of the April sky slipped through the curtains, casting soft shadows on the hardwood floor of his small San Diego home. His uniform hung neatly in the closet, its dark blue fabric pressed and ready. Bill was a retired Army captain who had spent more than a decade serving his country. He had seen dust and heat in desert towns, and he had weathered cold nights in mountain outposts. Now, years after stepping away from active duty, he focused on helping others remember those who had fallen. In the stillness of the early hour, he breathed deeply and let his memories settle around him. Each thought reminded him why he had agreed to this mission, to honor a young life lost far from home. Bill reached for a steaming cup of coffee from the table beside his bed. His wife, having long since left for her shift at the elementary school, had already packed a lunch for him the night before. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. In the living room, a row of framed photos lined the wall. Bill in uniform, smiling with fellow soldiers, snapshots of friends he had served alongside, and a family portrait taken on his final day on active duty. He traced his finger over a picture of Sergeant Royce Jennings, his best friend in the Army. Royce had died in 2009, and Bill still felt the weight of that loss. Every time he signed up to escort a fallen service member's remains, he imagined he was carrying Royce's spirit with him. This mission, he knew, would touch him deeply. It was April 18, 2025, when Bill received the order that the remains of Private First Class Marcus Delgado would be arriving at Dover Air Force Base later that week. The young soldier, only 22, had died in eastern Ukraine while serving, as part of a NATO advisory team. Bill read the message twice, careful to note each detail: Marcus's hometown, his parents' names, the date he had been killed. The words felt sharp, as if cutting into his chest. Bill had never met Marcus, but he felt a kinship. All those who serve are part of a larger family, bound by shared sacrifice. Bill's role was to ensure Marcus arrived home safely, his dignity respected every step of the way. After drinking his coffee, Bill moved to his desk and opened a folder containing official paperwork. He laid out each document on the table, smoothing creases with careful fingers. The first sheet was his military escort credentials signed by the Department of Defense Mortuary Affairs Office. The next was the transfer document from Dover Air Force Base, stating exactly how and when the remains would be transported. Finally, he read a letter sent by Marcus's family. His mother, Maria Delgado, had written of her son's love for his country, describing how he used to say he wanted to make his family proud. She closed her letter with a simple, earnestly expressed request: "Please bring him back as gently as you can." Bill felt a lump rise in his throat. He folded the letter back into its envelope and set it aside, resolved to honor every word. He spent the next hour making phone calls. First, he reached Delta Airlines military affairs desk to confirm his ticket. He would fly from San Diego to Dallas-Fort Worth on Flight 192, then transfer to a smaller plane bound for Des Moines, Iowa. In Des Moines, Marcus's parents would be waiting at the airport to receive their son's remains. Bill's voice remained steady as he spoke with the airline representative, but inside he felt a knot of nerves. There had been no problems on his previous escorts, but Bill understood how transportation policies could change without notice. He asked for written confirmation that he would be seated in the cabin with the casket. This arrangement was crucial. He needed to sit nearby to ensure no mishaps occurred. The representative assured him she would send an email later that morning, with all the details. Next, Bill called his nonprofit coordinator, Cynthia Park, who managed volunteers for Honor Guard USA. Cynthia had helped countless families and escorts with logistics and emotional support. When she answered, her calm voice reminded Bill of why they did this work. "Everything is set, Bill," she said. "Dover will release the remains on April 22nd. Delta has confirmed your reservation. Family arrives on April 24th at 10:30 a.m. Bill thanked her. Every time he heard the timeline, he thought of how fast events could change. Still, he trusted the process. He told Cynthia he would be at Dover on the 22nd and asked if she had any advice. She reminded him to rest on the flight, to keep his uniform neat. and to remember that sometimes small acts of kindness meant the most to a grieving family. Bill made a mental note to write his own note to the Delgados before he left. As mid-morning turned to afternoon, Bill gathered the items he would carry to Des Moines. He unfolded his dress uniform and hung it on a portable stand near the window. The uniform was the one he had worn to retire with honor, a crisp coat, neatly pressed trousers, and the medals he had earned during his deployments. Next, he took out a folded American flag. He kept it stored in a special drawer, wrapped in white tissue. This flag would be presented to Marcus's parents alongside the casket. It felt heavy in his hands, not because of its weight, but because of its meaning. Each fold represented a chapter in a long history of service and sacrifice. Bill laid the flag gently on his desk, breathing slowly as he remembered the first time he had held one before giving it to a family. He also retrieved a framed photograph of Marcus, which the family had sent along with their letter. In the photo, Marcus stood in uniform, smiling with his arms crossed in front of an old barn. His eyes were bright, hopeful, and full of life. Bill stared at the photo and thought of the life behind that smile. Marcus's dreams of finishing college, starting a career, maybe even beginning a family. Those dreams had ended abruptly, in a place far from home. Bill imagined how his own parents would feel if they saw him now, escorting a son who would never walk through the door again. He felt a tightness in his chest, but he knew he had a duty. He clipped the photo to the inside of his uniform coat, near his heart, so it would be with him always. By late afternoon, Bill had laid out everything he needed. He double-checked the paperwork: escort credential, transfer documents, airline confirmation email, and the family letter. He placed each item in a black leather folder with "Priority Fallen Escort" stamped on the front. He zipped the folder, closed, and slipped it into his briefcase, alongside his personal journal where he recorded thoughts and memories from every mission. Bill poured himself another cup of coffee and sat at his desk. He looked around at the quiet room, imagining how soon it would be filled with the sounds of an airport terminal, the overhead announcements, the rolling wheels of luggage, and the low murmur of people moving from one place to another. Yet through it all, he would hold a solemn responsibility: to be the steady presence for a family who would need his help most. As evening approached, Bill took a moment to reflect on why he did this work. He thought of each fallen soldier he had escorted before, how each journey had felt unique, yet connected by loss and love. He remembered the first time he had volunteered shortly after retiring, feeling unsure if he could handle the emotional weight. But as he knelt beside a casket draped in an American flag and witnessed a mother's tears as she clutched the framed photo of her son, Bill knew this was a calling. It was a way to serve even after leaving the battlefield. It was a way to keep alive the promise he had made to his friend Royce, that no soldier would be left behind, no matter how far from home they fell. That night, Bill packed his bag carefully. He folded his uniform and placed it on top. He tucked the framed photo into the side pocket, cushioned by a layer of clothing. In another pocket, he placed a small notebook and a pen, intending to write a few lines in the plane, something he could gift to the Delgados if the moment felt right. He also placed a simple wooden rosary in his bag. He did not know if the family was religious, but he believed a quiet blessing could offer comfort. As he zipped the suitcase, he felt a mix of emotions: pride, sorrow, responsibility, and a determined focus on the task ahead. Before turning in for the night, Bill set his alarm for 4:30 a.m. He wrote a brief note on his desk calendar: "Flight to Dallas. Be steady." He clicked off the lamp and lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. He brought to mind Marcus's face, again clear and bright. He thought of how Marcus's parents would feel when they saw him at the Des Moines airport, hands trembling as they received the folded flag. Bill hoped to be a solid rock for them, someone who understood their pain, even if he could not share it fully. Finally, as the soft hum of the ceiling fan lulled him, Bill closed his eyes and considered how he would carry this story with him through the trip, how every step, every gentle hand movement, every salute along the way would speak for the life taken too soon. He fell asleep with a quiet sense of purpose, ready to honor a young soldier he had never met, but to whom he felt deeply connected. Bill rose before the sun, the sky still dark beyond the window. He dressed with care, slipping into his army dress blues. Each button clicked in place, and he straightened his tie with steady fingers. Today was the day he would carry out his promise to Private First Class Marcus Delgado. Bill had tucked Marcus's framed photo into his shirt pocket so it rested against his heart. He folded the American flag precisely and placed it into a pouch inside his briefcase. He had spent the night reviewing every detail: boarding passes, escort orders, and the letter from Marcus's parents. Now he simply breathed, gathering his resolve before leaving the house. The drive to San Diego International Airport was quiet. The roads were nearly empty at this early hour, and Bill used the time to recall Marcus's life. He thought of the young soldier's dreams: finishing college, helping others, and seeing the world. All of that had ended too soon. Marcus had died while serving in eastern Ukraine, advising NATO forces. Bill felt their bond even though they had never met. He understood loss and knew the pain Marcus's family carried. Bill intended to carry it with them for a short while, ensuring every moment honored Marcus's memory. Arriving at the airport, Bill parked near the terminal and stepped out into the cool morning air. He carried his briefcase and a small black traveling case that contained the remains he had collected at Dover Air Force Base. The case was secured and marked clearly as human remains under military escort. Bill thanked the valet attendant with a nod and walked inside, boots echoing on the polished floor. As he approached the entrance, the automatic doors opened, revealing the gentle hum of airport life. He paused for a moment, adjusting the straps of his bag, and reminded himself that this journey was about far more than logistics. It was about respect. Inside the terminal, Bill followed signs to the special military check-in counter. The glow of overhead lights reflected on the marble floors, and a few travelers hurried past with rolling suitcases. When he reached the counter, a Delta agent stood waiting, eyes attentive. She recognized his uniform immediately and offered a respectful nod before asking to see his escort orders. Bill placed the paperwork on the counter and watched as she carefully examined each page. He could see the respect in her expression as she noticed the official stamps and signatures. In return, he gave her a polite salute. She returned it and began typing details into her computer. "I see you're escorting Private Delgado," she said quietly, her voice calm. "We've set up a first-class seat for you on Flight 192 to Dallas. Then you connect to Des Moines." She handed him a boarding pass. "If you need anything, let me know. We'll keep an eye on you." Bill thanked her, his voice firm but sincere. He tucked the pass into his pocket, mindful of the paper's importance. This ticket was not just for him. It was a guarantee that he would remain close to the casket. He offered a nod of thanks and wheeled the case toward the TSA checkpoint. At security, a uniformed TSA officer met Bill's gaze and asked him to step aside. Bill placed his briefcase on the conveyor belt and lifted his uniform for a quick pat-down. The officer paused at the patch on Bill's sleeve that read, "Honor Guard USA," and offered a respectful smile. Bill gave a slight nod in return. As the officer finished, he returned Bill's identification and allowed him to continue. Nearby, the TSA screening X-ray displayed images of clothing and personal items. Once Bill retrieved his belongings, he collected the casket, which remained under military guard, and wheeled it onto a separate cart. The guard quietly followed him to a secure holding area. Bill felt a lump in his throat but tightened his grip on the suitcase handle. Every step brought him closer to fulfilling his duty. Bill moved into the gate area, where the overhead boards displayed Flight 192 on time in bright letters. He set the casket beside a row of seats reserved for military escorts and made sure a small placard identifying the cargo as "Killed in Action" remained visible. He unfolded a small chair next to it and sat down, unfolding his itinerary folder. The terminal was still sparse. A few early bird travelers napped in chairs, and a cleaning crew polished floors. In the distance, the soft murmur of an airport announcement crackled through the speakers. Bill closed his eyes for a moment, letting the familiar low hum settle him. He thought of Marcus's parents, who would soon be waiting in Des Moines. He wondered how they would look when they saw the casket and the folded flag. He reminded himself to stay calm, to be a steady presence, and to represent every service member who had fallen. After some time, a Delta liaison in a crisp uniform approached and asked to see Bill's paperwork. He repeated the escort orders and explained that the casket would be loaded in a specialized compartment, but he needed to sit near it to ensure proper handling. The liaison made a phone call and then told Bill they had arranged for him to board early and take a seat in first class. Bill offered a heartfelt thank you as she placed a special boarding sticker on his jacket. He stood and gave another respectful nod before gathering his briefcase and helping the guard move the casket toward the aircraft stairs. As they walked down the jetway, Bill noticed the weight of the moment. Each step echoed with the promise that no soldier would ever be treated as mere cargo. At the bottom of the stairs, the guard gave directions to the baggage handlers, making sure they understood the sacred nature of the cargo. The plane's entry doors were open, and he could see the cabin bathed in soft morning light. Flight attendants stood alert, waiting to assist. Bill took a deep breath and stepped inside, carrying the casket into the cabin. The seats were arranged in neat rows, with the first few reserved for him. He gently placed the casket on a reinforced support structure near the front, then signaled a flight attendant to help him secure it. Together they strapped the brackets tightly, preventing any movement during turbulence. With the casket safely in place, the flight attendant showed Bill to seat 2A. She offered a comforting, professional smile. "We'll take good care of you," she said. Bill nodded, his voice low. "Thank you, I appreciate it." He sat down and placed his briefcase under the seat in front of him. The plastic overhead bins closed with a final click. Bill settled in and reached into his pocket, pulling out the photograph of Marcus. He held it gently, remembering the young man's bright eyes. Then he closed his eyes for a moment, whispering a silent prayer that the journey would be smooth and that Marcus's parents would know how much their son was valued. As the plane began taxiing, Bill glanced out the small window beside his seat. The runway stretched into the distance, empty of other planes. The engines roared to life and the aircraft rolled forward, lifting into the sky. Bill leaned back, hands folded over his lap, and watched the city of San Diego shrink below. He felt the gentle vibration beneath him and thought of how different this flight was from any other. This journey held so much more meaning. He imagined Marcus seated next to him, proud in his uniform, heading home to his family. Bill's mind drifted to his last deployment, to times when he had seen young soldiers face danger with courage. The memory of those moments, both fearful and proud, kept him grounded. A flight attendant approached with a cup of coffee and placed it on the small fold-down tray. She offered a faint smile and said, "If you need anything, just let me know." Bill accepted the coffee, his eyes meeting hers briefly. "Thank you," he replied softly. She nodded and moved down the aisle, checking on other passengers. Bill took a sip, feeling warmth spread through him. The mild bitterness of the coffee reminded him of long breakfasts before dawn during deployments. He set the cup down and unfolded his itinerary once more, making sure he knew the landing time in Dallas and the gate for the connecting flight to Des Moines. He also checked his phone for any new messages from his nonprofit coordinator, Cynthia. A brief buzz indicated she had sent an encouraging note. "Safe travels, Bill. The family will be honored to have you there." Mid-flight, the cabin lights dimmed slightly, and a soft hush filled the air. Bill leaned his head against the seat back and let his thoughts wander. He wondered about Marcus's life before the Army. Was he close to his siblings? Did he have a favorite song he hummed on? Long hikes? Bill imagined Marcus writing letters from boot camp, excited to graduate and serve. He pictured the day Marcus stood before his family, uniform crisp, confident in his choice to defend freedom. Bill's chest tightened as he felt a kinship with this young man he never met. He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a small journal, and wrote a few lines. "For Private Delgado, your service mattered. Your story does not end here. May your family find peace." When the seatbelt sign flicked off, Bill carefully stood and walked to where the casket rested. He knelt on one knee, folded hands, and took a moment of silent respect. He imagined Marcus's spirit at rest, knowing he was honored. He placed a hand gently on the sealed case, feeling the cool metal through his gloves. He whispered a quiet vow. "I will not fail you. Your family will see you soon." Bill straightened and stepped back, ready to return to his seat when a curious passenger approached. The passenger, noticing the uniform, asked softly, "Are you here with the military?" Bill offered a gentle nod and said, "Yes, I'm escorting a fallen soldier home." The passenger's eyes flicked to the casket, and she nodded back, words held in respectful silence. B. He walked off the plane at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport, feeling a mixture of relief and worry. The flight from San Diego had been smooth, and he had kept a watchful eye on the casket the entire time. As he guided it off the jetway, he felt the weight of his mission like a presence at his side. All he wanted was to keep Private Delgado safe until his family could have him home. Bill adjusted the strap of his briefcase and took a deep breath before turning the corner into the terminal. The first thing he noticed was the bright, sprawling concourse, dotted with shops and restaurants already bustling with travelers. Despite the early hour, there were people hurrying to gates, families saying goodbye, and business travelers typing on laptops. Bill guided the casket carefully toward the area marked Military Transfer Operations. He held the frame tight, making sure its tag remained visible. Private First Class Marcus Delgado, fallen service member. Next to him walked a mortuary affairs officer from Dover, quietly assuring the gate agents they were on schedule to load the casket onto the next flight to Des Moines. At the military desk, Bill laid down his escort orders and the documents showing that he would accompany the remains through to Des Moines. He expected a polite nod and a quick stamp in his file. Instead, the young gate agent frowned and tapped on her keyboard. Bill kept his expression calm, but inside his stomach twisted. The agent looked up and said, "Sir, I'm sorry, but our system shows your reservation as denied boarding." Bill blinked. For a moment, he wasn't sure he heard correctly. "Denied boarding?" he repeated quietly. He held out his escort orders. "I have all my paperwork. The Department of Defense confirmed I must sit in the cabin with the casket." The agent glanced at the forms, then at her screen. "I understand that, sir, but the policy changed last week. It says no human remains can be in the cabin unless they have been cremated. I'm sorry, but you'll need to accompany the casket in the cargo hold." His heart sank. He had never been asked to ride in the cargo hold before. Every escort he knew always sat near the casket, in the cabin, to maintain dignity and oversight. Bill kept his voice steady. "I'm sorry, but mortuary affairs directed me to remain with the casket at all times. My orders are very clear." The agent's fingers paused over the keyboard and she frowned again. "I'm sorry, Captain Hargrove. I see your credentials, but the rule is the rule." He bowed his head for a moment, steadying himself. Around them, travelers passed by, oblivious to the tension. Bill felt the weight of the glazed eyes on him, but pressed on. "May I speak with your supervisor? There must be a misunderstanding." The agent nodded curtly, picked up her desk phone and spoke into it quietly. After a moment, she motioned to a uniformed supervisor standing nearby. He stepped forward and asked to see Bill's paperwork. Bill handed over his bundle. The supervisor scanned the documents, his expression unreadable. When he looked up, he said, "I'm afraid the agent is correct. We have a new corporate directive. I'm sorry, Captain, but you cannot remain in the cabin. You must move to the cargo hold." Bill felt a tight knot form in his chest. "Is there someone at Delta Corporate I can contact? This conflicts with what mortuary affairs told me." The supervisor shook his head. "I don't have that information here. The directive is new and came down unexpectedly. I'm sorry." Bill swallowed hard, unwilling to accept defeat. He took a slow breath, glancing at the casket. Marcus's photo was taped to the inside of Bill's uniform, a constant reminder that this was not just another cargo shipment. He met the supervisor's eyes. "I cannot leave these remains unattended. The family has a right to know their son was treated with dignity all the way home. I have to stay with him in the cabin." The supervisor's eyes narrowed, and his lips pressed into a thin, Line. He stepped back. If you refuse to comply, we'll have to offload you and the casket. You will not board this flight unless you follow our rules. Bill's breath came in a quiet rush. He thought about all the fallen soldiers he had escorted before. Everyone had flown in the cabin, never once was it questioned. But now, a change deep within the airline's policies threatened that tradition. He refused to abandon his post. Kneeling gently beside the casket, he placed a folded flag and the family's letter on top, intention clear in his eyes. He turned to the supervisor and said firmly, "I will not move without these remains. I am here, and I will stay." The supervisor's face hardened before he turned away and signaled security to approach. Within moments, 2 uniformed airport officers arrived, their faces solemn. One officer cleared his throat. "Captain Hargrove, we need you to step aside," he said, voice low but serious. Bill stood slowly, his uniform crisp and posture rigid. "Sir, I'm not leaving the casket. These remains cannot be left unattended." The officer nodded to his partner. "If you do not comply, we will have to physically remove you from here, and the casket will be sent to cargo without an escort. Is that understood?" Bill's throat tightened. He straightened his shoulders and held his gaze steady on the casket officers. "I'm aware of the consequences, but I will not abandon my duty." He knew this would become a standoff. People walking by began to notice, curiosity lighting their faces. A small crowd formed across the terminal, but he kept his eyes on the officers, refusing to back down. A few minutes later, the mortuary affairs officer from Dover returned. He had been out of sight while Bill argued. The officer's face went pale when he saw the scene. He quickly moved to Bill's side, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Captain, let's step back a moment," he said quietly, moving Bill a few paces away from the casket. With a gentle nod, Bill released his hold on the casket and stepped back. He watched as the mortuary affairs officer knelt and placed a protective cover over the remains. The casket was then moved slowly toward a holding area under the watchful eyes of other officers. When the casket was safe, the mortuary affairs officer helped Bill to a nearby seat. He looked at Bill with concern. "I didn't know they would deny you boarding," he whispered. Bill sighed. "Neither did I. I thought the system would recognize a fallen escort. Now, I don't know what will happen next." The officer pulled out his phone and dialed a number. He spoke rapidly, then nodded. "Captain, they're looking into it. Corporate headquarters has been alerted. We just need to wait." Bill leaned back, tension still coiled in his chest, but he felt a small shred of relief that someone was fighting on his side. As they waited, word of the situation spread. A handful of fellow soldiers waiting for their own flights recognized Bill's uniform and came over to offer quiet words of support. One young soldier, in camo fatigues, said, "We appreciate what you're doing, sir. Keep holding the line." An older veteran, adjusting his walker, added, "They can't treat you like this. You're doing the honorable thing." Bill gave each man a nod, thankful for their company. Yet even as he tried to appear composed, his mind replayed the mortifying moment when the gate agent first told him no. He worried about Marcus's family sitting in Des Moines, unaware of this disruption. Would they think he had failed them? He forced himself to breathe slowly, to focus on the fact that he had not given up. Inside the terminal, travelers used their phones to capture photos and videos of the scene. A few tweeters posted, "Honoring. Our fallen soldier at DFW escort refuses to leave casket." The story began to gain traction. Bill didn't mind the attention if it helped pressure the airline to reverse its decision. Each passing minute felt both long and quick. He sipped bottled water, careful to stay calm. The airport's bright, fluorescent lights shimmered off the polished floors, and the distant buzz of carts reminded him that life went on around this small, intense moment of protest. Bill's thoughts drifted to Marcus's parents. He had read in their letter how they spent sleepless nights waiting for word of their son. He didn't want to add to their grief, but he felt certain that if they knew how hard he was fighting, they would understand. About an hour later, the mortuary affairs officer's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and brightened slightly. "They've approved you to sit in the cabin," he announced to Bill. Relief and vindication washed over him. He nodded slowly, letting the tension in his shoulders ease. "Thank you," he said softly. "Thank you." The mortuary officer patted his arm. "They're arranging for the casket to be brought back. You'll have your seat." Bill rose quickly and followed the officer toward the holding area. The small crowd of onlookers clapped quietly as he returned to the casket. One man even saluted him, tears in his eyes. Bill gave a respectful nod in return. The mortuary officer and 2 gate agents lifted the casket again. As they did, Bill placed a steady hand on the side and said, "Let's go home." They wheeled it toward the tarmac where a small Delta transport cart waited. Bill climbed into a small shuttle behind the cart, and the driver guided them onto the runway, heading toward the waiting plane. The morning sun had climbed higher, casting long shadows across the airfield. Bill watched each step with caution, making sure the casket's tag remained visible. When they reached the aircraft, the ground crew had already cleared a spot in the cabin, prepared for the casket's return. Bill knelt and watched as they lifted it carefully inside. He helped secure it in place, just as he had on the first flight. This time, there was no argument. The flight from Dallas to Des Moines was quieter than Bill expected. The cabin lights dimmed and many passengers settled into their seats, reading books or resting with their eyes closed. Bill sat near the front, the casket just a few feet away, secured respectfully in the space prepared for it. He had made it, after hours of confusion standing his ground and waiting for the airline to correct their mistake. Now the final leg of the journey had begun. He looked out the window as clouds passed beneath them, like soft cotton fields floating in the sky. The tension in his body was slowly easing, but his thoughts were still active. He thought about Marcus Delgado, only 22 years old, a young soldier who had left home with courage in his heart and a sense of duty in his soul. And now here he was, returning home in silence, wrapped in the flag he had sworn to protect. Bill reached into his pocket and touched the corner of the letter from Marcus's mother, Maria. Her words had stayed with him. "Please bring him back as gently as you can." He had read it several times since Dover, and each time it reminded him of the true meaning behind his mission. He wasn't just delivering a casket, he was carrying a family's heartbreak, a mother's final goodbye, and a father's silent strength. As the plane flew closer to Des Moines, Bill began to prepare. He took out a small notebook and wrote a few final lines to the Delgados. He wanted them to know that he stayed by their son's side the whole way, that he had watched over him during every moment, from base to plane, through delays and confusion. He described how the airline staff eventually did the right thing, how strangers had shown respect, and how even those who didn't know Marcus had been touched by his sacrifice. The note wasn't long, but it was filled with sincerity. When he finished, he placed it carefully next to the folded flag. The pilot's voice came over the intercom, gentle but firm. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our descent into Des Moines International Airport. We ask that you fasten your seatbelts and prepare for landing. On behalf of the crew, thank you for flying with us." Bill looked once more at the casket. His hand rested lightly on the side as the plane gently dipped toward the earth. Outside the window, green fields and small towns came into view, growing larger by the second. As the wheels touched down with a soft bump, Bill felt his chest rise and fall with quiet relief. They had arrived. The plane taxied slowly along the runway, then came to a smooth stop at the gate. Flight attendants moved quickly, opening overhead compartments and preparing the cabin for deboarding. But Bill remained seated, waiting for the honor team that would come to meet him and take over the final steps. On the tarmac, a small military honor guard had already gathered, their uniforms sharp and polished. The Iowa National Guard had been notified earlier that week, and now they stood in formation, ready to receive their fallen brother. Beside them stood Maria and Roberto Delgado, Marcus's parents. Maria wore a navy blue sweater and held a small bouquet of white flowers. Her eyes were fixed on the plane door. Roberto, tall and quiet, stood straight with his hands folded, his face full of quiet emotion. The aircraft door opened, and a soft rush of fresh air entered the cabin. Bill stood, straightened his uniform, and nodded to the lead flight attendant. She whispered a soft, "Thank you for your service," and stepped aside. With careful hands, Bill helped the crew gently lift the casket and bring it to the aircraft's exit. Outside, the honor guard took slow, practiced steps forward. Together, they lifted the casket from the jet bridge and began the solemn walk toward the waiting family. Bill followed closely behind. Each step felt heavy, not from the weight of the moment, but from the deep responsibility he carried. The ground beneath him felt solid, yet every breath reminded him that this was a sacred moment. As they neared the family, Maria placed her hand over her mouth, her eyes filled with tears. Roberto stood silently, eyes locked on the casket, his jaw tight with emotion. The honor guard gently placed the casket on a prepared stand. Bill stepped forward, unfolded the American flag from his case, and placed it carefully on top. Then, he turned to face the family. He reached into his coat and pulled out the letter he had written and the photograph of Marcus. He handed both to Maria with gentle hands. Her fingers shook slightly as she took them, her eyes brimming with sorrow and gratitude. Bill then handed the folded flag to Roberto, placing it firmly in his arms. "Your son served with honor," he said quietly. "He was never alone on his journey. I stayed with him every step of the way." Roberto looked Bill in the eyes, nodding slowly. No words passed between them, but the message was understood. Maria stepped forward and hugged Bill tightly, surprising him. She whispered, "Thank you for not letting go of him." Bill returned, the hug gently, blinking back the emotion building in his chest. A small ceremony followed, led by a local chaplain who offered a prayer and words of comfort. A few veterans from the community stood nearby, hats in hand, saluting during the prayer. Bill stood among them, hands clasped behind his back, eyes on the flag-covered casket. The wind stirred slightly, fluttering the corner of the flag. It felt like a whisper from above. After the ceremony, a hearse pulled up beside the honor guard. The casket was lifted again, this time with the help of local veterans and service members. As it was placed into the back of the vehicle, Maria and Roberto followed behind, holding each other's hands tightly. Bill stood quietly to the side, watching them with quiet admiration. He knew the pain would never fully leave them, but he hoped this homecoming gave them some peace. When the hearse drove away, Bill remained still. The honor guard began to disperse, and the chaplain came over to shake his hand. "You did something important today," he said kindly. "You reminded us all what honor looks like." Bill nodded but didn't speak. His eyes were still on the road where the hearse had disappeared. Later that evening, Bill sat alone in a quiet cafe near the airport. He sipped a warm cup of tea and wrote a few lines in his personal journal. He didn't focus on the trouble at the Dallas airport. Instead, he wrote about the look in Maria's eyes, the quiet strength in Roberto's handshake, and the way Marcus's photo felt when it pressed against his chest on the flight. He wrote about the salute of the veterans, the soft flutter of the flag, and the kindness of strangers who paused to honor someone they never met. He closed his journal and looked out the window at the setting sun. It bathed the town in gold, stretching shadows across the road. For a moment, everything felt still and meaningful. He whispered quietly to himself, "He's home." That night, as Bill returned to his hotel, he received a message from his nonprofit coordinator, Cynthia. It read, "The Delgados called. They were deeply moved. They said you brought their son home with love and care. Thank you, Bill." He smiled softly and turned off his phone. As he lay in bed, he didn't feel sadness. He felt a calm sense of fulfillment. He had done what he promised. He had honored the fallen, stood firm in the face of a mistake, and made sure a family got the goodbye they deserved. And in doing so, he reminded everyone watching that duty doesn't end when the uniform comes off. It continues in quiet acts of respect, in standing tall for what is right, and in never leaving someone behind. Weeks had passed since Bill Hargrove had escorted Private First Class Marcus Delgado home. Yet, the memory of that journey remained fresh in his mind. Every step of it, From the call he received, to the struggle at the airport, to the emotional reunion in Des Moines, had left a deep mark on his heart. It wasn't just another mission. It was a reminder that sometimes even a quiet act of doing what's right could echo far beyond what anyone imagined. Bill returned to his normal routine in San Diego, but things felt different. His days were quieter, but his thoughts often wandered, back to that flight, to the moment Marcus's mother hugged him and to the peaceful look on her face when she received her son. He didn't talk about it much, not even to his close friends. But inside, he knew that journey had changed something, not only in him, but in others as well. A few days later, Bill received a phone call from Cynthia, the volunteer coordinator, from Honor Guard USA. Her voice sounded brighter than usual. "Bill," she said, "you need to sit down for this. Delta Airlines just announced a new company-wide policy." Bill raised an eyebrow, curious. Cynthia continued, "They've created a special protocol for military escorts. It's being rolled out across every airport they serve in the country. Escorts will now always be allowed to travel in the cabin with fallen service members. No exceptions, and get this, they've named the change after Marcus Delgado." Bill didn't know what to say. His throat tightened. A long silence followed before he finally replied, "That's more than I expected." Cynthia went on, "You did something that mattered, Bill. You stood up. You made them look again at how they treat our fallen. And the whole country saw it." As word of the policy spread, so did the story. News stations began to reach out to Bill. At first, he didn't want the attention, but when a local journalist asked to write an article, not about him but about Marcus, he agreed. The story was shared online with the headline, "He wouldn't leave the casket. Now no soldier will fly alone again." People all over the country read about what happened. Some left comments thanking Bill. Others shared their own stories about loved ones lost in service. Veterans and Gold Star families messaged him personally to say how much it meant to see someone honor the fallen so publicly. One message stood out. It was from a woman in Texas who had lost her brother in Afghanistan. She wrote, "We didn't get an escort when he came home. I always wished someone had been there. You were there for Marcus. Thank you for reminding the world what it means to care." Bill never looked for praise. He hadn't stood his ground at the airport for attention. He had done it because it was the right thing to do. But now, seeing how others were affected, he realized that standing up had caused something good to grow, a small ripple of respect that was reaching farther than he ever thought it could. Soon he was invited to speak at a local veterans ceremony. At first he declined, but after talking to Cynthia and thinking about the Delgados, he changed his mind. He knew this wasn't about him. It was about Marcus and every soldier like him. At the event, Bill stood in front of a quiet crowd. Flags waved gently in the background. He wore his uniform and carried the photograph of Marcus tucked safely inside his jacket, right over his heart. He spoke simply, using words that came from a place of truth. "That day at the airport," he said, "I didn't plan to make a statement. I just knew I couldn't leave him. A fallen soldier deserves a witness, someone to walk beside them, someone to say, 'You mattered.' Marcus Delgado mattered. All of them do." The crowd listened closely. There were tears, soft nods, and moments of deep silence. When Bill finished speaking, the audience stood and clapped, not loudly, but in a way that felt full of meaning. People didn't see him as a hero. They saw him as someone who refused to forget. After the event, a group of local students came up to meet him. They had been studying recent history and had read about the escort story online. One of the students asked, "Mr. Hargrove, do you think small actions really change big things?" Bill smiled and said, "Yes, they do. Sometimes doing the right thing, even when it's hard, teaches others to do the same." The student nodded slowly. "I want to be like that someday," he said. Bill placed a hand on his shoulder. "You already are. Just remember, respect never goes out of style." In Des Moines, the Delgados continued to share their son's story. They created a small scholarship fund in Marcus's name, offering help to students from military families. The first scholarship was given to a young woman whose father had served with Marcus. At the award ceremony, Maria Delgado spoke with a soft but firm voice. "We lost our son far too soon, but we gained something as well. We saw that kindness still lives, that people like Captain Hargrove will stand for what's right, even when it's not easy." Bill was invited as a guest of honor. He sat quietly beside the family, his hands folded in his lap. When the scholarship was announced and the student came forward, she hugged Maria, then walked over and hugged Bill. "Because of what you did," she said, "I want to serve too." Later that evening, as the sun began to set over the open fields of Iowa, Bill took a quiet walk by himself. The sky was painted in soft orange and pink. He walked slowly, thinking about everything that had happened. Not just the challenges, but the small moments of grace. The hug from a grieving mother, the salute of an old veteran, the way strangers had stood still at the airport, placing hands over hearts. He reached into his coat pocket and took out Marcus's photograph again. He looked at the young man's smile, the quiet pride in his stance. "You're home," Bill whispered, "and you didn't come back alone." Back in San Diego, Bill returned to his volunteer work with Honor Guard USA. He continued to escort fallen service members, never asking for recognition, always making sure each one was treated with dignity. Now, whenever he stepped onto a plane, the flight crew greeted him with quiet respect, knowing exactly who he was and what he stood for. He was no longer just a passenger. He was a symbol, a quiet guardian for those who could no longer speak for themselves. And in the hearts of those who had watched him stand beside Marcus's casket at that airport gate, he would always be remembered as the man who refused to walk away. The man who stood firm, not with loud words, but with quiet, unwavering respect. And because of him, every fallen soldier would now travel home with honor, their final journey marked by care, dignity, and a companion who never let go.